So, I would like to speak of Pan-Africanism in several ways. First of all, I would like to give some basic definition of what is Pan-Africanism and how it is situated in the colonial and post-colonial context, and also why the issue of the colonial legacy, as I put it in the subtitle of my presentation, is an equivalent of the coloniality of power. We are still in colonized societies, especially in the Western world, but even in the decolonized world, and we need to understand the historical background of this situation. And I think that Pan-Africanism is the best ideological system to understand the long term of domination, of oppression, and of structural inequalities that many people face today. So first of all, I would say that Pan-Africanism is a polysemic term. So here you have at least 4 different definitions of the word. The first one is an anthropological definition, that is Pan-Africanism is the combination of all the African elements that were taken out of Africa during slave trade and the post-colonial era. So it's with the prefix pan, which means the globality, the wholeness of something. And this definition was built by several scholars. I quote some of them. One is Valentine Mudimbe, with a reference in the post-colonial literature, who wrote The Idea of Africa, where he explains that the idea of Africa was built out of Africa. Another one is Melville Herskovits, the father of cultural anthropology in the American studies, who explained that we should study American societies with a scale of Africanism, that is all the survival and cultural elements that Africans deported from Africa took with them and reinvented in the American situation. And the third one I would like to quote is Roger Bastide, who is a French sociologist who worked on Brazilian issues, and who says that America gives a picture of a break between culture and ethnicity. That is, African people who were deported during slave trade had already a cultural background. They took it with them in the America, and once in America, they had to engage in relationships with other people from other spaces of Africa, and from this kind of miscegenation was born a global Afro-American culture. The second definition is that Pan-Africanism is a movement of solidarity and the liberation of Africans in and out of Africa. So this is the issue of anti-slavery and anti-colonial struggles. Third one, that is the political doctrine of unification of African states in the era of decolonization. That is the issue of African unity, Africa Unite, which is the title of one of my last book. And fourth, Pan-African deals with geopolitics of what we call the global African family. The global African family is the groupings of all the people of African descent, of African origins, and the African continent. And we should think of Pan-Africanism as a counter-history of Westernization, because Westernization was built on the idea of the colonizing of the world by people from European descent, and they invented the term the Western world. And Pan-African is about the way Africans were disseminated all over the world and built their own networks of organization and solidarities. Another point, very important, is the way Pan-African issue leads to think of the fact that colonization starts with a reset of the historical timeline of the peoples who have been colonized. I think there is a 1492 jurisprudence when Columbus not discovered but conquered the Americas. It was a jurisprudence. We say that history started at this moment, but there were history before. And Pan-African is really interesting to question the different timeline of world history. The classic historical timeline, the way we study history at La Sorbonne, Oxford, and Cambridge, and so on, is that history is divided in several parts. One is prehistory, that is before history, when the people did not have writing systems. Then after you have antiquity, Middle Ages, modern history, and late modern period. This last part of history, late modern period, is the contemporary history. We are today in the late modern period. This is the way we are taught history at La Sorbonne, Oxford, Cambridge, and so on. The colonial historical timeline was the way history was built to engage in the colonial movement. That is, the history of Africa starts with the exploration of Africa by European peoples. There was no history before Europeans put a foot in Africa. So you have different parts. You have the discovery of Africa, with several explorers who discovered the Congo, the Nile, and so on. And then you have the history of Europeans in Africa, with a very specific moment, which is the 1885 Berlin Conference, where the colonial powers reunited in Berlin decided to divide the African continent without any African leaders present in spheres of influences. And then from this moment you have the colonial era and then the decolonization and post-colonial Africa since the 60s until now. So it means that African contemporary history will start in 1960 with the decolonization of African states. This is another view of the colonial historiography. What is interesting with the Pan-African historical timeline is that it changed the world perspective on global history, explaining that what we call prehistory, that is history before writing was invented, is still history. It is precisely initial history, fundamental history, basical history. It is not prehistory. And it's starting in Africa. So it changed the vision of the way history was colonially written. And then you have the great ancient African civilization, Nubia, Egypt, Mali, and so on, which spans from the 5th century in the Christian times until the 16th, 17th century. And then you have resistance to slavery in and out Africa, with a major event, which is the birth date of Pan-Africanism, which is the Haitian Revolution. From 1791 to 1804, Africans in Saint-Domingue fought for their liberty, and they became independent. And I will explain later the importance of the Haitian Revolution. What you need to keep in mind is that Pan-African history started in the end of the 18th century, and Pan-African history is the contemporary history of Africa and African Afro-descendant people. It is not starting in 1960s with the decolonization of African states. It is starting in 1804 with the independence of Haiti, which is the first decolonization from the French colonial empire and the second decolonization in the Americas after the United States. And it occurred in a time where you have the French Revolution, where you have the American Revolution, and those revolutions, American and French Revolution, was the beginning of the late modern period. So the late modern period of African history starts with the Haitian Revolution and not with the independence, the so-called independence of African states in the 50s or the 60s. So it changed the global vision of history. Another point is the way the geography is also colonialized. The way the Western world divided the world with the West, the East, the North, the South, and so on. And also the way 1885 with the Conference of Berlin and 1960 with the independence of African states defined what I call a continental geography of Africa, saying that Africa is just the continent and nothing else. While in 1804, with the Haitian independence, we have the case where some Africans became independent out of Africa. So there was a part of Africa out of the African continent, and that part is still existing. And it is the beginning of the political involvement of the African diaspora in the international relation, the birth of Haiti in 1804. And this is also the issue of the reduction of Africa to continental Africa in the colonial mind, and to black Africa in the racial mind. So these are very basic facts that should be known. Another point is here you have a drawing with the main stages, places, and concept of Pan-African history, just to get a global view of it. So you have forced migration with more than 12 million people deported from Africa and enslaved in the Americas. And this forced migration creates the first historical African diaspora. And now we have a second historical African diaspora, which deal with the people from the post-colonial migration. So you have the historical African diaspora and you have the post-colonial African diaspora. So those people were enslaved, and this enslavement was based on the color of the skin. So the theory of race inferiority was used, and in defense, African people, those who were later defined as African, formed a common feeling of belonging to Africa. And the first issue before Afrocentricity, before Pan-Africanism, was Pan-Negroism. The feeling of being the same through the color of the skin. Because before Africa was engaged in slave trade, no one in Africa was defining himself from the color of his skin. There were African names, there were African groups, ethnical groups, but the color of the skin was not the main definition of what does it mean to be African. And then those people who were enslaved in the Americas start to define strategies of liberation. So one was the Back to Africa movement, the idea that since we are not free in the Americas and we will never be free out of Africa, we should go back to Africa. So one of the main tenants of this movement was Marcus Garvey, a famous Jamaican leader. And another issue was the idea of colonization of Africa. And this is why space like Liberia was created to bring back Africans who were free in the Americas. Sierra Leone was another example of this Back to Africa movement. And this double strategy, Back to Africa and colonization, leads to the slogan of Africa for the Africans. And this slogan is very important because it deals with two different conceptions of the property law. How do I belong to Africa as an African from the diaspora? And how, as an African from the continent, Africa belongs to me. So this is the issue of the right of property and the right of belonging. Who owns Africa? Who's in a right to declare of being of African ancestry? So this was a very big issue. And this was part of the rehumanization of black peoples and regeneration of Africa with another main slogan, which is the African Renaissance. The idea that Africa must reborn from what it went through by using its past as a force to move forward. So you have a triangle of ethical issue which deal with identity, with sovereignty and reparations. And then you have countries like Sierra Leone, Liberia, Haiti, but also Egypt, Ghana, Congo, and South Africa that constitute the geography of Pan-Africanism and later the geography of Afrocentrism. So a few words about Haiti. Haiti was before named Saint-Domingue. It was the wheat-faced colony in the Americas with sugar, with coffee, with tobacco. In 1789, when the French Revolution happened in Paris, there were 500 African enslaved there, and 30,000 French master and 30,000 French free of color. And this situation was really insurrectional. And in 1791, the African people decided to rebel. And when they rebelled, most of them were born in Africa. And 1787 was the year most of the Africans were debarked in Saint-Domingue. And the life expectancy in Saint-Domingue was 5 years. So it means that those who decided to rebel in 1791 were at 1 year of their death because of the living condition in Saint-Domingue. And they managed to get their freedom, and the Saint-Domingue Revolution was the starting of Pan-Africanism. First successful slave revolts, second independence in the Americas prior to the liberation of Spanish America, because the Spanish colonies were then liberated by Simón Bolívar with the help of the Haitian people, with the help of President Pétion. So the issue of Bolivarism is linked with the issue of Pan-Africanism, and when we speak of decolonial in South America, we have to connect it with Pan-African issue in the Caribbean and think of the case of Haiti as a connection between South America and Africa. So this is really the crossroad of several movements. Haiti was the first country out of Africa ruled by black peoples, so it was a threat for the American system because at this time America was under the slave system until 1865, and Haiti was officially recognized by the Americans only in 1864, so 1 year before the abolition of slavery, because of the fear of a slave revolt. The position of the French government, who decided at this time to impose an economic debt to Haiti for its independence. So Haiti is the beginning of the story of the debt. That is the place where the global mechanism of financial racket was built. And we are still in this issue from the moment Haiti was created, because France decided that we should indemnize the owners and the masters and not the slaves. The deportation of black soldiers who fought for the UK in Haiti, because there was a fear that those black soldiers who experimented fighting struggle for black liberation would repeat it in another British colonies. So the way a war is a way to move people from one place to another place regarding ideological issue. And then also the way some African Haitian intellectuals, later like Benito Sivin and Antenor Firmin, engaged in the Pan-African movement. For example, Antenor Firmin wrote The Equality of the Human Race in 1885, and in this book he explained that with the same living condition, there is no way that an African people in the Americas, there is lots of, with the same living and schooling condition in America, a black man can be president as a white man. It was in 1885. And when Barack Obama was elected president, lots of people say that he foresaw it in 1885. So Edward Blyden, who is the great father of Pan-Africanism, was born in Saint Thomas. He moved to Liberia. He developed several issues, very important, like the issue of African nationality in relation with citizenship, African personality, the idea of a West African university to involve African knowledge and Western knowledge. The idea that British imperialism promoted the doctrine of responsibility, that is different from French imperialism, where you have assimilation. This is why post-colonial issue is not the same in the French-speaking and the English-speaking world. The issue of economic self-reliance and the debate about Western Christianized elite versus native elite. So Edward Blyden is a very important man, but is mostly unknown. On the other side, you have a brief survey of the way Sierra Leone and Liberia were created. And what is interesting to know is that since Africans from the Americas were driven back to Sierra Leone and Liberia from the early 19th century, today if you want to study African linguistics, you have to go to Sierra Leone and Liberia, because this is a place where you can find all the African languages from all over Africa. And this is a place where started inside Africa what we call the process of creolization. It is not in the Caribbean, it is in Sierra Leone and Liberia. And this is a very interesting issue. And you can make connection between the Caribbean situation and the Sierra Leone and Liberian situation. So now a brief survey of Pan-African political causes and social mobilization. It would be too long to make the story of Pan-African movement, and it is not the main topic. But here you have some facts about what mobilized Pan-African movement all along the 20th century. You have lots of leaders. First of all was the issue of racism and segregation, and it starts with the London Conference, the Pan-African Conference in 1900 in London, which is the official starting date of Pan-African movement, with the quotation of W.E.B. Du Bois, who says that the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. What you can do or cannot do, whether you are on this side or on the other side of this color line. So he was thinking of the United States, who officialized segregation with the Plessy versus Ferguson Act in 1896, and he was also thinking of South Africa and all the colonized lands. The issue of land, especially land grabbing, it did not start with the Chinese, absolutely not. It started with colonization. We need to keep it in mind. As well as biological warfare did not start with Iraqi, it started with the European moving to the Americas with the poisonous sheets. Politics, how can we find a representative government for Africans? The notion of culture. And here is a quotation of Pixleka Isakasimi, who was the founding leader of the African National Congress of South Africa, who after he got his degree from Columbia University made a speech about the regeneration of Africa, social issues, education, work and youth improvement, justice. We want some trial by juries with Africans, and it has a very connection with the current situation with the International Criminal Court, for example. Economics, we want shared commercial development of Africa. The moral issue, abolition of slavery and the liquor traffic, because the abolition of the liquor traffic was one of the pretexts to colonize Africa. The second one was to fight against Islam. So it was already a religious war in the mind of the European when they conquered Africa. The issue of military with war disarmament or self-defense, and ideology regarding the way Pan-Africanism interact with communism, capitalism, socialism, and other isms. So this global Pan-African movement in the 20th century got a very decisive setback in 1929 with the crisis, the Great Depression, because it was self-funded, and lots of Africans who were engaged in those organizations were giving their own money. They did not have any government who was supporting them, so they were self-funding. And in 1929, with the crisis, the first who get fired were African peoples, and the taxes on colonial economy increased, so it was really difficult to keep the movement alive. What led to the rebirth of the movement was the invasion of Ethiopia in 1935. Ethiopia was invaded by Mussolini, by the Italians, and people decided to organize. And this is the moment where the second Pan-African humanitarian association was created. The first was the Congo Reform Association, which was created in 1903 to denounce what was happening already in Congo with the genocide by the King of the Belgians, Leopold II. And in 1935, the second Global Humanitarian Pan-African Association was created. It was the Ethiopian World Federation. And it organized the support to the African and Ethiopian civils who were bombed by the Italians. And from this social and humanitarian mobilization emerged new networks of Pan-African activists. There are lots of them. I cannot spend much time about it. But it ended up in the 5th Pan-African Congress in Manchester in October 1945. And from this moment, 1945, Pan-Africanism, which was mainly based in the African diaspora, decided to engage in the liberation and unification of Africa, with leaders like Kwame Nkrumah, who is, generally speaking, the most known Pan-African leaders. During this time, you have lots of organization and movement which were created. You have the African National Congress of South Africa in 1912, with several chapters all over the world. I think there was probably one in Sweden during the apartheid times. The Universal Negro Improvement Association African Communities League of Marcus Garvey, which is the most important. It has to be, there was to be something like 6 million people. The series of the Pan-African Congress organized by W.E.B. Du Bois, the National Congress of British West Africa in Gold Coast, Sierra Leone, Nigeria, and Gambia. Liga Africana for the Afro-Portuguese in Lisbon, who were fighting against the colonial regime, the West African Student Union in the UK, all these organizations in the 20s, the Harlem Black Renaissance, the Rastafari movement, the Negritude, and so on. So, the shift was made by a country, Ghana, where Kwame Nkrumah managed to return and to take the country until it became independent in 1957. So when it became independent, Nkrumah was a Pan-African leader who was trained in Gold Coast and in the United States, and he had lots of empathy with the situation of the African diaspora. And he did a reconciliation between the continental and the diasporic vision of Pan-Africanism. And he had this quotation: "Our independence is meaningless unless it is linked up with the total liberation of Africa." So he gave a strong political and economic support to African liberation movement and to Afro-American movements. He asked for the implementation of a union of African states with a continental government and a common politics of defense, diplomacy, and economics, an African central bank, an African citizenship, including the African diaspora. And he used the term of Union of African States and not United States of Africa, because United States of Africa means only the states of continental Africa. But Union of African States means that everywhere the African diaspora is living is also an African state. And this part of the African diaspora has the right to get a representative place in the way the continental policy in Africa is led. So in 1960, African independence movement started. So it was independence without decolonization. Countries got formal independence, but not a decolonializing process. And I think that we should take example from countries like Bolivia, who created Ministry of Decolonization. I think it's really important that in those African countries there were such works to be done. The intangibility of colonial boundaries was a great problem, and it's still a great problem, because it had also repercussion in the different African diaspora. Because you have, I'm from Benin, but I'm also from Togo, and from Nigeria, and from Ghana. And once you are in the African diaspora, you are categorized as just Beninese, because you have a Beninese citizenship. But what happens in Togo also had repercussion in Benin. So in the diaspora, we have nationalized our organization, whereas we should Pan-Africanize it. And it is, I think, a legacy of the colonial boundaries that we keep in mind when we move out of Africa. But before these colonial boundaries, those who were coming out of Africa, they felt Africans, notwithstanding their nationality. Neocolonialism, authoritarian regimes were other problematic issue. 1963, the Organization of African Unity was created, and it adopted a continental dead-end and misleading top-down conception of Pan-Africanism, because Pan-Africanism is bottom-up. It starts from the roots, from the masses, and not from the leadership. Although there were lots of intellectual and great leaders, it starts with the mass. And from this momentum, the situation of the African diaspora, especially the Afro-American diaspora, made also a shift. In the 1950s, you have the civil rights movement, the civil rights campaign from 54 to 64. 54 is also the date of publication by Richard White of a famous book, which is entitled Black Power, which is how can I say, the summary of his trip in Ghana, and he explains that African Americans had nothing to do with African. These are two different societies. We don't have the same kind of superstitious thinking as we can find it in Africa. We are rationalized, we are civilized, so the situation, the relationship between African American and Africans was really was not really clear. In June 1966, Stokely Carmichael, who moved out from the Malcolm X and Martin Luther King activism, asked and proclaimed the necessity to get Black Power. And from this moment, Afro-American organization made a shift regarding the international movement and also the way the struggle of Afro-Americans should be connected with the global worldwide struggle. So you have a series of political coalitions with the New Left, with the American Indian Movement, the Peace Movement Workers, Forward Liberation Movement, Women's Struggle, also very important. And then in May 1972, the first African Liberation Day. On the other side, the US government opposed this activism, and COINTELPRO was created to destroy the Black Panthers Party with the same kind of tactics used against communism, because there were always accusations of being communist when you were not with the American point of view. So here you have a very interesting movie, maybe some of you saw it, the Black Power Mixtape, which was directed by Goran Olsson, the Swedish filmmaker. And the film footage was shot by Swedish journalists in the 60s and 70s. They were following several Afro-American activists, and it was discovered in 2011 in the archives of the Swedish television, and he made it in a film documentary, very interesting, because in this documentary you see the way the Pan-African movement in the United States was divided along several ideological lines. One was left Pan-Africanism with grassroots movement, revolutionary movement, women movements. Another one was racial Pan-Africanism with the separatist issue. So separatism, we should make a specific case of the black situation. Also with patriarchal vision of the way society should be organized. Cultural Pan-Africanism with a very elitist and mystical vision. And national Pan-Africanism, which is quite conservative and liberal, and which was later used by the American government when it imposed the affirmative action policies. And from all this ego conflict and ideological movement emerged Afrocentrism as the connection of several ways of thinking. Negritude, Diopism, which is based on Cheikh Anta Diop, Africana, which is the way this kind of studies are involved in the academics, and Afrocentricity, which deal with the spirituality, the African spirituality. So one main task was how to challenge Eurocentrist historiography. This is not something new, because even in the 17th century, you already have slave narratives, you have testimonies, you have law dissertations of Africans, former slaves of Africa or African students. For example, in Europe, you have Anton Willem Amo, who was a Ghanaian philosopher who studied at Art University in Germany. In the slave narratives, you have Oloda Ekiano, who wrote his own history, and who was used by Steven Spielberg, I think, in the Amistad movie. And you have lots of literature by African people. And writing was a way to show that we are also humans, because it was a time when you have to prove that Africans are human beings, and when you write, you show that you express your own way of thinking. So in the 20s, it was the Harlem Renaissance, the Negritude movement, with lots of issues regarding black solidarity, rejection of inferiority, pride of color. So the Black and Beautiful movement start from this period. Dreams of Africa, because those people were driven out of Africa, they were driven to death, they were deported, they were driven to despair, and they need to regain hope in their own humanity and their own situation in the Americas. And then from the 40s, 50s, and 60s emerged a more social and militant vision of what should be an African and black history model as regarded as a subaltern education. There are three people quite interesting. The first one is Carter Woodson, who wrote The Miseducation of the Negro, and he developed the idea that we have a chronic miseducation regarding black people and a kind of educational genocide by the way that the school system reintroduced segregation, and you can end with segregation, but the way the school system is organized after segregation is still making segregation alive. So we have to tackle the education issue. And if you don't mind, you will interiorize a way of thinking that you will not have to be order what you have to do, you will make it naturally. The second one is John Henry Clarke. Carter Woodson developed the Black History Week, which now is a Black History Month in the US and even in the UK. And in France, we tried to make a Black History Month 2 or 3 years ago, but the French authorities were not really agreed. They say it was communautarist, etc. So it was a big issue. And we need a Black History Month because we need to decolonize the way history is taught in school. Second one is John Henry Clarke, who precisely explained why education is not apolitical, because the content of the textbook schools is not neutral. So we have to think of it, and he created the African Heritage Studies Association, where African American, African and Caribbean academics who are not, who did not feel represented in the academic organization of American historians, decided to unite and to think the way we should change it and make our own textbook. And the last one is the most important, Cheikh Anta Diop, who defended a PhD, a doctoral dissertation, 2 doctoral dissertations at La Sorbonne. The first one was forbidden because it was supposed to be too controversial. It was about Egypt and the way the former Egyptians, the Pharaoh civilization was black. So it was in the 50s, and it was a revolution at this time. And the Sorbonne University expressed how it was unpleasant to question the classical historiography. And Cheikh Anta Diop later developed a whole systematic view, starting from the Egyptian civilization, and he showed how Egyptian civilization gave to the rest of the world most of his knowledge regarding mathematics, science, literature, and so on. So this is very interesting, but it was absolutely rejected by the French academics and even most of the African academics. Diop was from Senegal, so after he defended his doctoral dissertation in 1960, he went back to Senegal, and the Senegalese president, Léopold Sédar Senghor, one of the fathers of the Negritude, was politically and ideologically opposed to Cheikh Anta Diop, and he did everything so that Cheikh Anta Diop never was allowed the right to teach at the Senegal University. So today you have the University Cheikh Anta Diop in Dakar, but the teaching of Cheikh Anta Diop are not present. So Cheikh Anta Diop is really important because he also deals with the way we should make the rehabilitation of a lost identity through the restoration of historical consciousness. And Cheikh Anta Diop was early translated in English, and Afro-American movement developed an Egyptology school, which later turned into Afrocentrism. There were also Think Black alternative schools to challenge the token of Black studies program in mainstream academics. Because as the American authorities saw that Afro-Americans were organizing by their own, the American system decided to promote some Afro-American inside the academics in order to separate the movement in two parts. Those who are with the system and those who are not with the system. And those kind of divisions are classical. So you have also two historiographical references, quite interesting. One is Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and the other one is Julius Nyerere, the president of Tanzania, who wrote Education for Self-Reliance. You also have references in the works of Du Bois, Fanon, Nkrumah, and so on, especially about the issue of location and relocation of the historical subject. So Afrocentrism, is it a science or ideology? You need to understand that Afrocentrism is a more separatist and black nationalist movement. It started in the 1900s, but it was in the 1960s, during the radical times. So you have several specific issues regarding language. So they developed Ebonics, which is Black English. So you can find bidialectical schools in Afro-American urban schools, where children learn classic English and Black English, and Black English is a real language. You have Afro-American writers who wrote in Black English, and this is very interesting the way the issue of language was used. You have also a teaching of hieroglyphics, because in the way Cheikh Anta Diop built his methodology, most of it laid on the interpretation of Egyptian hieroglyphics. You have also the teaching of African language like Kiswahili and so on. You have food, soul food, music, dance, celebration, etc. So this is a very fruitful cultural movement. And three figures did a kind of systematization of this fruitful movement. The first one is Maulana Karanga, whose former name was Ron Everett. So you have lots of people who change their name into African names, but it is absolutely not specific to Afrocentrism, because in the early 90s, there were lots of Africans who have English names. They were called Johnson, etc., and they want to be known in history as Africans, so they adopt Ethiopian name. One example is George Griffiths, who was from British Guyana. When you are George Griffith, you don't know if it's white or black people. You don't know, you have any clue about his ancestry. He decided to rename under the name Ras Makonnen. So when you hear Ras Makonnen, you know it's a black man, even if you don't have his photography. And this is also something quite interesting when you look at the past. Lots of engineers, inventors, you don't have any picture of them, and once when you read a book, you discover they were black. So this is also something quite interesting. So Maulana Karanga developed two main concepts. The first was Kawaida, which is a kind of scale of values, of African values, with Umoja, which means unity, Kujishagulia, which means self-determination, Ujima, collective work and responsibility, Ujama, Naya, Kumba, and Imani. He developed a second concept, which is Kwanzaa, a kind of African version to Christmas, so as to help the African families to build cohesiveness. The family issue, the family situation was really important in the way Afrocentrism was built. The second one is Molefi Asante, who developed a specific kind of Afrocentrism, which is called Afrocentricity, He rejects the notion of ism, saying that it is not an ideology, it is a system of value, it is a paradigm, it is a worldview based on the African conception of the world. So it is a much more Diopist perspective, and it deals with the way that Africanization is a way of de-Westernization. So you have to define what is exactly Westernization and how you de-Westernize when you are based in the Western world, because you are impregnated of the global environment. So it deals with the rehabilitation of one's African original ethos through spirituality and knowledge in 5 levels. So first, the skin recognition, understand that you are a black people because your skin is black. Second, the environmental recognition, recognize that you are either in a black majority or white majority space, and recognize your place in the society where you live. Third is personality awareness. Fourth is interest concern. So are you first interested in what is happening to those who are the same as you or in the global situation? And 5, the Afrocentric awareness. The third one is Leonard Jeffries, who developed a more subaltern and vision of Afrocentrism. What you need to know is that Afrocentrism was not a big issue until 1987, book by Martin Bernal, who is a white scholar, who was the first white scholar to deal with Afrocentrism. He wrote a book called Black Athena about the Afro-Asiatic roots of Greece civilization. And from this moment, the debate around Afrocentrism, which was inside the African and Afro-American community, moved out of this community, and it entered in the white scholarship. And the white scholarship did a false misinterpretation of what is Afrocentrism. They started to explain that it was anti-racism, it was anti-white, anti-Semitic, and the accusation of anti-Semitic was based on the way they were connected, persona non grata, political figures like Louis Farrakhan from Nation of Islam with academics. So it was a very complicated period, and Afrocentrism gained a very negative view in the mainstream media. But it is still an academic system which is quite scientific and which is out of the issue of black supremacy or white supremacy. It's an intent to understand the world and the situation of black people in the US precisely, and then in the rest of the world. So one of the ethical issue, I need 10 minutes more, I think, is what I call the existentia africana, or resistencia africana, because as it was said, existence is resistance. The most tragic period of African history, that is the deportation of millions of Africans out of Africa, the most tragic period of African history, led to the most fruitful movement of ideas, Pan-Africanism. And this is something really interesting when you think of resilience and resistance. So is African legacy a source of motivation or empathy? This is a question that should be asked. And you have 3 kind of concepts that you can use to think about it. The first one is what we call Afrosensitiveness. That is a double consciousness. It was first experimented by W.E.B. Du Bois when he tried to define what does it mean to be African and American at the same time. Is it possible to be African and American? Is it possible to be African and French, African and Swedish, and so on? And he says that we need something like a black psychotherapy to understand the way we belong to a different society that has not links with our former ancestors, or that has violent links with our own past. Because deportation and black Atlantic trauma is something very violent. It is still in the DNA of African people. So there were questions: where do we come from? What is our ancestral lineage? Do African peoples know where their great-great-greatfathers were buried? this is a place you need to know to put yourself in a historical continuity, because the deportation or the migration is a rupture with your own historical timeline and geographic timeline. So these are questions that led lots of African Americans to develop the DNA test to find their roots precisely in Africa. And it also engaged with the notion of ancestor side. To kill the mind of a people, you have to kill the connection with his ancestor. And this is something really interesting. What is also the African side of being African American or Afro something, when the universalizing cultural reference is either anti-black or anti-African. Second concept is Sankofa, which is represented by a birth with an egg in his mouth, and it's an Adinkra symbol. Adinkra is part of the Akan society in Ghana, and it is the idea that we should take care from the past and keep it and keep what is good for us to move forward. So this is the idea that to remember Africa is to remember Africans who have been scattered in the world. And Africa is a body that was cut in pieces. And to remember our past is also a way to remember the African identity, which has been dispersed, spread all over the world. So this is the notion of unity. Third, you have all the traditional African philosophies that are quite interesting to study. And I should move forward. So here you have some issue about the way people organized in this situation. So this is all about grassroots organizing, with the idea that those who succeeded in a difficult neighborhood should not escape from the neighborhood, but should be engaged in the area. This is something also quite interesting to understand, and the notion of economic self-reliance inside Afro-diasporic organization, the necessity to improve the image of black peoples so as to denounce racial profiling. This is really important, the way we should address to the media, the way we should get our own media, the way also we should question the notion of patriarchy with the search, generally speaking, for a black male role model for the men, but should this model be patriarchal? This is a great debate, and you have liberation schools in those diaspora, in this organization, which were founded and operated by women, but with a male-centered approach. So all these distortions lead to the making of Afro-feminist movement, which are quite interesting to question this issue of biological determinism opposed to shared duties in everyday life. Also, all the cultural movement, Notting Hill Carnival in London, which has a very interesting history regarding the way people who were racialized in the street decide to put their own culture in the street, to take the street and turn the street at their advantage, the Hip Hop Summit Nation, and so on. And at last, the thinking of how we decolonize politics, economics, and political economy, since Africans were used as a currency and a source of labor. So how do we think the economic of relationship? How do we move from what we used to call slave trade to what is now neoliberal free trade? So this is very important issues that are discussed in those movements. Is capitalism the ideological base of racism, class struggle, or race struggle? All those issues are at stake in the debate regarding Pan-African and Afrocentrism movement. Here you have just a vision of the global African family. So you can see that half of the African population is just 10 countries: Nigeria, Ethiopia, Egypt, Congo-Kinshasa, South Africa, Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda. So those countries made most of the population of African countries. You have the list of the African diaspora. So the first one is in Brazil, then in United States, Colombia, Haiti, Republic Dominicana, France, Jamaica, and so on. So it gives a global vision of where are African peoples in the world and how the African population is distributed. Then you have a schema with, at the center, the African Union, which is a powerless organization, which is funded by the European Union. And outside of the African Union, you have the Africans from North America, Europe, South America, Asia, and Pacific, who are organizing in Pan-African networks. There are lots of Pan-African networks where we discussed those ideas. Those are self-organized Africans and Afro-descendant groups and structural networking for the defense of collective interest. So you have a global civil society, a global Pan-African civil society that is working, and a state orientation that is not aligned on the global civil society. And I will finish with this quotation of Walter Rodney, which I think is really important for us to think of. Walter Rodney, I have had a rare privilege of traveling around and living and working with black people in a lot of contexts. This has sensitized me to ways in which we need to understand the specificity of different situations, to talk about Pan-Africanism, to talk about international solidarity within the black world, whichever sector of the black world we live in. We have a series of responsibilities. One of the most important of our responsibilities is to define our own situation. A second responsibility is to present that definition to other parts of the black world, indeed to the whole progressive world. A third responsibility, and I think this is in order of priority, is to help others in a different section of the black world to reflect upon their own specific experience. The first priority is that we address ourselves to our own people. This is how we analyze where we are at. Secondly, we can say to other participants in a third world struggle, here is the analysis, as we see it, of how we are going. Those people will take it, and they will do it, and they will do with it what they see fit. But if they have a certain sense of internationalism, they will treat it very seriously. And only thirdly, then am I in a position to say, from our particular standpoint, your struggle is moving in this direction, or this is how your analysis seemed to me to be working, or in light of our experience here or there, we might want to question this or that aspect. Thank you.